Everyone. Welcome to CTL's Education Professional Development Series. I'm Stephanie Shea, the Marketing Manager here at CTL, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. If you haven't been familiar with CTL, I just want to let everyone know we've been headquartered here in Portland, Oregon since 1989. We specialize in IT solutions for education and government customers. And we are a Google for Education partner specializing in rugged CTL Chromebooks, laptops, convertibles, two-in-ones, tablets, and solutions designed for K-12 education. Over the past 2.5 years, we've been working with Google and introduced a line of CTL Chromebooks that have been recommended by PC Magazine. They've received high rating, excellent rating, as best choice for Chromebooks in education. And as part of our commitment to education, we are also offering these free professional development webinars on topics that are relevant to K-12 ed tech. Today we're going to have Google Forms for Educators, and the presenter will be Catherine Livick of our professional development partner, Education Service District 112 of Vancouver, Washington. Before we get going, I would like to go over the attendee interface and let everyone know how to participate. We've got a screenshot of what you should be seeing on your own computer desktop, and you're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can type your questions into the questions pane of the control panel during the presentation, and they will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Before we get started, I would like to do a little poll and find out how much experience everyone here has with Google Forms. That'll help Catherine to know where everyone's at with this and with her presentation. Ooh, I see some people are experts. Maybe they will have some tips for us. I'm going to let everyone continue voting for another couple moments. Okay, it looks like people have finished. I'll close this poll, and we can see that there's no one with no experience, so that's good news. 29%, some experience, 43 have a lot, and then we've got 29% experts. So this will be good. We can really skip over maybe some of the basics and get into some of the other advanced functions. Okay. Let's see. Sorry. All right. So I'd like to introduce Catherine Livick of our Professional Development Partner, Education Service District 112 of Vancouver, Washington. Catherine is a Google Certified Trainer and Google Certified Administrator, and she's going to go over Google Forms with everybody. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello. Well, it's going to be interesting if you guys are experts, because some of this is definitely going to be review for you, but hopefully we'll give you a few little extra nuggets, and if anybody has questions about the more advanced stuff, then you obviously can ask those questions during the webinar, and Stephanie will let me know, and I will try to address them. Let me get my screen showing for you, and hopefully that's working. Are you guys able to see me, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, just wanted to check there.
Great.
All righty. So I'm Catherine, and I was a classroom teacher for 15 years and have been doing this professional development gig for a couple of years, 3 years now, I think. And we do a lot of Google Summits. We present all over the region, and we also do instructional technology coaching in districts around our region for our educational service district. And we see a lot of different implementations of Google Apps and Forms and all the uses that people are doing with these tools. So I've been getting a lot of questions lately about forms. People, I think, are becoming more aware that this is there and what a powerful tool it is. So the first thing we usually talk about is what exactly can you do with forms? And people immediately think of quizzes right off the bat. That's the first thing that you think you might do with a Google form, but there are really a lot of different things you can do. It's really just a tool for collecting information, and you can collect that information from students, but also parents, colleagues, anybody that you need to collect information from. Um, you can have it use it for a feedback and reflection forum. You can use it at parent night, which is one of the first uses I ever used Google Forms for, was to have some stations set up in my classroom on back to school night. And all that stuff that you want to know as a teacher, like, what's the best way to contact you? I don't care what the phone number is in our system, like who do I actually want to talk to about your kid? When's the best time to call, the best way to reach you, what is something I really need to know about your student. All of that information I put into a form, and I had parents just sit down and really quickly fill the form out, and so I had it all organized in a spreadsheet in one place. Of course, I did provide some alternatives for people who are scared of the computer, because there's always some folks like that. But I really felt like that gave me a really powerful tool to collect that information and help me organize it so that I didn't have to mess with it a lot, and it was in a convenient place for me, because teachers are busy, as you know. I know some elementary teachers who do lunch count. Special ed teachers always encouraged to collect behavioral data using this kind of a form instead of the carbon or paper form that either the kid carries around or that you distribute to teachers, because you get a lot better response rate with this kind of a form, and you get a better confidentiality than carrying around a sheet of paper. Entry and exit tasks are huge use for forms, something that I used almost every day in my classroom when I was teaching middle school. Um, any kind of equipment checkout, classroom library, books, anything like that. Observation forms, really useful for administrators as well as for peer observations if you have an opportunity in your professional learning community, or whatever you call your group of teachers that kind of collaborates together to observe each other. This is a really great way to do instructional rounds or that sort of observation. So tons and tons of stuff that's not even necessarily right there in the classroom. Worksheet type of forms are used pretty frequently, as well as the quizzes and tests. You can have people signing up for appointments, parent conferences, or student conferencing. I used to use it for writing conferences when I had students individually meet with me to discuss their writing. And I wanted to do just 15-minute sign-ups during the day. I would have the students sign up that way. Made things a little more efficient. Quizzes, tests, even self-grading possibilities are even built into forms now, which they did not used to be. So that's a pretty cool feature. And just basically anything that you can do to streamline your workflow, you can probably think of a form to help you with that. So there are a lot of possibilities here. So it's a really good thing to just have the basics of this tool and get comfortable with that, and then branch out from there. So the basics of forms, which some of you guys are already obviously going to be familiar with, is that I always tell people to start from the New button in Drive. So if you can get to your Google Drive and you can find that New button, you can make a form. But a lot of people kind of miss it because it's below the fold. It's in the little pop-out that says More. So sometimes people have been using docs, sheets, and slides for a while and don't even know Forms is there. So this is a pretty important revelation for them. You can also use the Forms homepage, which is forms.google.com. And I like to start from Drive because all my stuff is stored in Drive. It gives me an idea of the hierarchy and it makes sense to me. But the Forms homepage has some things going for it now that it didn't before. Namely that it has a template gallery that's pretty helpful for beginners. So it's also an okay way to start. You can find that Forms gallery in your waffle, and I'll show you where that is. The technical name for the waffle is the App Launcher, and that would be this thing right here, and you can go to the Forms homepage that way. I'm going to adjust my window a little bit because I'm kind of running out of screen real estate. So at the very top where it says Start a New Form, this is the template gallery. And if I hit more, I have a whole bunch of stuff here I can start out with that gives me some ideas with how to use forms. And if you haven't done forms before, this is probably a good way to see what's possible if you haven't got anyone nearby that can show you how they've been using it. So there's a couple of different ways to get in there, either from this Forms homepage where you can start a blank form, or from the New button in Drive. You have a lot of different ways to ask your questions in Google Forms. When you start a new form, you'll get a blank one, and you can frame your question in a number of ways. You can have multiple choice or checkbox, short answer, or extended response. There are a bunch of other types that you can do. We'll take a look at those in just a second. From this Forms composition page, you can also select your colors, themes. You can upload an image if you want to change the appearance of your form. And then you can set all your basic settings using your little gear or sprocket there that tells your form whether it's going to be available outside your district, help you share a link to the results, give a message to people after they've submitted the form. So there's a lot of different important things that you can do right from that main form page. So I'm creating a new one right here, and it always starts me out with an untitled form and a multiple choice question. Best practice, you always want to name your form first. Okay, and something that people kind of need to know, this is the title of my form. But up here where it says untitled form, even though I've changed the title of my form, this is the name of the file. So once I've typed a title, if I click up here, it will automatically assume that I want the same name for the file, but I can change it without affecting the title of the form that people will see. It's important to know this because this is how you're going to find it in your Drive, and you need to know what your form is named. The form description can be just that, a description of the form, or maybe some general instructions for how to complete it or who it's for. And you don't have to get too detailed there, but you can add a little bit of instruction. And down here, I can see I get a little handle that appears when I hover over my question. When I have more than one question, I can drag them up and down to rearrange them. If I click on the name here where it says untitled question, this is the actual question itself. And I have my multiple choice options. I just click to change them. And when I want to add an option, I just click add the option. And I can keep doing that indefinitely. If I want to give you the choice to write something in, I can add an other. And I also have an option now to upload a photo as an answer. And I can use photos that are in my Drive. I can even search Google right here and choose one of these properly licensed for reuse photos as an answer. So the answer to this question could be puppies. And this is kind of a newer feature that they released in August on Forms, and this has been really exciting to some of my special ed folks and elementary folks who wanted the opportunity to use these forms for more visual uses or with students who are not strong readers. Kind of gave them a little bit more of an option to use these forms or have students be a little more independent with them. So that's what a multiple choice question looks like. As I scroll up and down here, my little bar on the right floats up and down with me. And when I want to do a new question, I hit the plus. And I can change to any other question type just by clicking on that question type. Short answer and paragraph are very similar. The short answer just gives you a small box to answer in. Paragraph gives you a longer box. I'm not sure what the character limit is, but you can type quite a lot in either one of them. Even if you only give them the space for a short answer, they can type beyond what you see in the box as an answer. It does limit them, but not terribly much. Multiple choice you've seen. I could also use check boxes. The difference between multiple choice and check boxes is that if I have more than one correct answer or selection I'd like people to be able to make, I would choose the check box. Multiple choice is those little radio buttons that will only permit one answer, and check boxes, they can select multiples. A drop-down only allows one choice, much like the multiple choice, but it compacts them all into a single window, and I'll show you kind of the difference here. I'm going to go preview my form with this eyeball. This is how it would look to someone who is taking it. So instead of having a long list of options, I can choose this. Of course, I can't see my puppy if I don't have it listed as multiple choice, so that is kind of a disadvantage, but it does make a long form look a little bit shorter. I have some other choices here. Linear scale, so if I wanted you to rate something from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, I can choose how I want my scale to look numerically, and I can also label it so it's clear which end is the good end and which end is the bad end. Whatever I want to do there. I can do a multiple choice grid, which they feel kind of complicated when you're setting them up. But what you really do is you get a lot of multiple choice data in one question. So I could list out several baby animals across the top, you know, puppies, kitties, snakes, and then down the side I could have cute or not cute, and that I could get that information as to whether my respondents think puppies, kitties, and snakes are cute or not cute, and it's all in one question. Really, the choice of the type of question you select is going to be based on how you want your data to come out, and when we take a look at the responses, that'll make a little bit more sense. Sometimes this is really a recursive process. You have to create your questions, preview it, and then kind of decide a couple of things. Number one, does this form make sense to someone who is not me, who doesn't know what I'm asking? Because a form kind of has to operate independently. Even if you're giving it to students while they're in class with you, it's a good idea to have it be kind of self-explanatory, or as self-explanatory as possible. And you also need to make sure that you're getting data in a format that's useful to you. And there are some ways to phrase your questions that can make it a lot easier than others to have data that is useful to you. You can also collect a date or a time. So this gives them their little calendar that they can click on and pop out, make it a little bit easier for them to put a date in. So you could use this as an assignment Dropbox. When did you turn this in, or when did you finish this, or when did you start it? So those are your question types. You can look also at the forms up here. Now, if you look at your forms, your personal instance of forms, and you don't have little puzzle piece, that's because you have not put any add-ons in your particular instance of forms, and that's okay. You can do that here with your 3 dots. You can add add-ons. And add-ons just extend the functionality of forms beyond the basics that we're going to talk about today. And we'll get back into here and look around a little bit later, but just so you know, that's there. Some people are really upset that they don't have the puzzle piece, so I always want to explain why you might not have it. But that's where my add-ons are, and these are things that I've added to do to kind of extend the functionality, make forms do some new cool stuff that it doesn't originally do. My settings here, pretty important to understand what's in this sprocket. There are 3 tabs within the settings, and the first thing you're going to want to do is know if you are releasing this form into the wild, whether it's going outside your district or not. This would say your district name right here. That's my district that I'm in, and I can choose to have this be public, or not. And if it's public, I have to make sure that I know, who I'm sharing it with, who's going to see it. If I restrict it, then I have some other options to collect the email address of the people who are filling it out, and I always recommend this to teachers. If I am sharing this with students, if it's a quiz or something, it's definitely going to be, I'm going to want to know who gave me what response, and I can always put in a field that says name, but having taught middle school for many years, I am quite familiar with the temptation of students that age to write Captain Underpants or something similar in the name field. Against all better judgment, they will do stuff like that, and then you don't have useful data. So I always like to collect their email address. If they're logged in to your domain, you will know who gave you what answer, and that makes it a lot easier. Google Forms also collects a timestamp for every response, whether you're collecting email addresses or not. But the combination of having the email address collected and the timestamp collected is a pretty powerful data point for teachers, especially for quizzes or tests. So just to know that those are in settings under general, pretty important. You also have the option to have a response receipt, and you can give them the choice that the respondent receives an email and says, thanks for filling out this form or something like that, or not. You don't have to do that. If you are doing a test or quiz, you might want to limit to one response, meaning that if I'm signed in as Catherine and I take this quiz and then I decide that I want to go read the chapter again and take the quiz again, I might not be able to do that if limit to one response is selected. So if you're really doing this as an assessment, it's something to think about, that you have that potential to do that. And it does remind me right there they have to be signed in. So if students can't see your quiz, you need to remind them to be signed in. Not usually an issue if you're on Chromebooks because they have to sign in to use them. But if you're using a regular PC or a Mac and they have to sign into Chrome or sign into Google services, sometimes that's something to remind them about. You can also decide whether your respondents can edit after they submit their quiz. They do have to keep the link for their quiz to get back into it. And you can also decide whether you want them to see everybody's responses in a summary format. And you're just going to have to take a look at how those summary charts look and decide if that's what you want them to see. And text responses is usually an anonymized version of the short answer text. Your presentation settings give you some options as to how the quiz or form is going to look to your audience. Show progress bar is something that just says, hey, you're 33% complete, or you've done 25 of 50 questions. If you have a really long form, especially if it's in multiple sections or pages, that could be a good idea because people do lose interest and wander off. I'm sure that some of you have gotten into a corner of the internet where you started answering a few questions about something and then found that it was just on and on and on. You didn't know how much was left and you kind of wanted to stop. So this is to kind of prevent that from happening if you do have a long quiz or form. You can shuffle the question order, which is kind of helpful to prevent cheating or at least ameliorate the possibility of it. You can also shuffle the multiple choice options within a particular question if you're concerned about people looking over each other's shoulders or at each other's screens, and I'll show you how to do that. You can also have them submit more than once and make that easy for them by putting a link right on the submission page if you want to. You can decide what you want to have as a response after they hit submit. And as a teacher, this gives you kind of some workflow control and classroom management options, because I can say, when you're done, take out your history book, read chapter 5. Apparently I can't type and talk at the same time today, sorry. So if it's something that they're doing as an entry task, you can have them do that and then give them instructions for the next thing they're supposed to do, which I always found kind of handy. And you could say thank you, or you could say have a great day, or stop staring at your screen. Anything you want to say can go there. You can also put a link to a website that you would like them to visit, and it will let them click through to that. You can also create a quiz right in your form. And what this will do is allow you to assign point values to questions. You do have to go and actually assign a point value to every question, or we'll just assume you don't want that question graded. This is a step that I frequently forget to do and then wonder what is wrong with my form and find out that it was me. So maybe that's just me. But you do have to go through every question that you want it to grade and give it a point value and an answer key. It will not, at this time, do anything to grade subjective questions like short answer and extended response, where they typed in their own response. It doesn't try to grade those. There is an add-on called Flubaroo that will help you with that a little bit if you would like. You can decide whether you want the grade released immediately to the person who took the quiz, or after you have reviewed it, which if you have a mixture of questions and some that you have to grade yourself, you would probably select this. And then you decide if you want your quiz takers to see things they missed and the correct answers and how many points. And normally, most people kind of leave it like this configuration. They can see how many points it is, but they may not immediately see what they missed. It just depends on your student body and how they would respond to that. So going back to my form, if I decided I wanted to make this a quiz, I'm going to click on one of my questions here. And you'll see this little blue guy called answer key has popped up, and that's because I turned on the make this a quiz. Down here I have some other options too. If I'm doing this as a quiz, I'm going to hit required. If a question is required, it won't permit them to submit or go on to the next page of the quiz until they have actually submitted an answer for that, which is good. In my experience, if people can skip a question, they will skip a question. So I leave that on when I can, unless it's truly, truly optional and you don't want them to have to like click in your text box and type nothing or none or whatever. I would leave that there. I can duplicate this question if I like it a lot and I want to just change a little bit about it for the next one. I can trash it if I'm not into it anymore. I can delete any one of these responses if I feel like I have too many. And over here, I have some other options here that are specific to the type of question I'm asking. Since this is a multiple choice question, I have some options here that I don't have in, for instance, a short answer or a paragraph question. I can show a description, which allows me to give a little bit more detail or instruction about this particular question. Please choose only one answer. Okay, so if this was multiple choice or checkboxes, that would actually be a relevant thing to say. And I also have the option to shuffle my option order. So if I have that checked, that means that the first kid might have great as their first option, but the kid next to them might only have yuck as their first option. So it doesn't look the same to every student, just makes it a little harder for them to glance over at the screen and see what their neighbor put down. So depending on your kids, you may or may not want to choose that. And we'll get into this go to section based on answer in a little bit. That's how we do branched forms or responsive quizzes, which is kind of has some exciting possibilities. If I'm going back to my answer key here, if I decide I want this to be a quiz, I'm going to click on that. And the first thing I have to do is make sure this doesn't say 0. And this is the part I always forget. I go pick the right answer, and then I forget that I didn't give it any points. So even if they get it right, they get 0 points. So that's me. Maybe you will not have that little mental issue that I have, but for me, I always forget, oh, I've got to go here and say this is worth 1 point or 5 points or whatever. I've marked the correct answer. I've given it a point value. And I can also choose to add some feedback. If they get it wrong, I can say whatever I want to say here. I can even add a link for them to go look at, which is kind of cool because that way I get my data on who got the question wrong, and I also give them an opportunity to go review some information. Maybe this goes to a YouTube video or an article that they could read or anything that might help the person who got it incorrect. Likewise, I can do the same for correct answers, and I can give them any kind of feedback I want. And then those students that select that answer will get some feedback as they go. And it kind of reviews for me what I've done. If I want to go back to changing my question, I just hit edit question and it kind of toggles back and forth. Okay. So those are my basic quiz options. When you are creating a form, like I said, you're going to want to do this as kind of a circular process. You're going to want to go look at your form, see what it looks like to others, think about whether it would make sense. And when you first start making forms, if you haven't made them before, sometimes this process can take a while. It can be slow and it can be a little frustrating. I always felt like it took me forever to get a form right, and now I can kind of blast them out pretty quickly because I've done so many of them. So don't worry, it will get easier. But when you first do it, I highly recommend going back multiple times, back and forth, to see if the form makes sense. And even having some people kind of guinea pig it for you. Have a fellow teacher look at it. Otherwise, you might get into a situation where you've assigned this to students in whatever way you've done it, and then they're, I don't understand, or this one doesn't make sense, or how am I supposed to answer this? It's just nice to kind of have a trial run and get those out of the way first. I know I'm probably overstating the importance of that, but in my experience, it's just so frustrating to have those problems that it's much easier to go out and just kind of take care of it beforehand. So that's what you use your eyeball for. That shows you what the form looks like to others. And another important thing you can do when you are previewing a form is actually take the test yourself. So if I go over here and preview my form, and it's telling me right here, this is what it's going to look like to my students. It says we're recording your email address, making sure that I'm signed in as the right person. And you can see it shuffled my option order because I didn't type them in that order, but it shuffled them for me. Oh, and I left the date question here, so I guess I can go ahead and answer that. And you can see this one is required, this one is not, so I didn't necessarily have to answer it. But I'm going to submit that. And now I have my little response message that tells me what to do. And I can see a summary of responses because I allowed that to remain checked as well. So this is the information that any student would be able to see. So now I can go back and decide if that's what I want my students to see. The other thing that I can do, and I'm going to go back to where I was editing this form, is look at my responses and decide if the data I'm getting is making sense to me, if it's all the data I need, if I need more, if I have too much, or if it's in a format that's useful to me. So I'm going to click on my Responses tab. Forms keeps the data that it collects in a couple of places. The first one is right here in the form under the Response tab. And I have a couple of different options here. The summary just shows me exactly that, a summary of what everybody has said when they've responded. I only have one respondent so far. Gives me kind of the average of the points that were collected for a quiz. And it says, you know, who missed the question? Well, apparently I answered that question totally wrong. Apparently I was supposed to say it was great. And I didn't elect to release the scores to the people who took the quiz, so it's going to tell me that. This is the response pane that only you as the editor of the form can see. So you can see it's selective about what it shares if you do keep that checkbox on for sharing the data. I have how are we today, and I can see who responded which, or how many responses of each type I got. And if I want to see the individual responses, this gives me a question by question for response for each person that took it. So this is me, and it says I got this one wrong and I got this one right, and I answered this one. If I had more than one person who had taken it, I could click next and it would go to the next person and I could see their entire quiz at a glance. So those are the kind of summary data that's kept in forms. If I want to get down to the nitty-gritty, I'm going to click this great little green crosshair here and click Create Spreadsheet. By default, it'll be named the same name as your form, and add responses in parentheses. This is going to go into your drive and you'll be able to access it from there. But I'm going to go ahead and create it. And so you can see it's collected the timestamp, which it will always do, my username, which I asked it to do with that checkbox in the settings, the score, which is I didn't do very well on this quiz, and then the individual questions. So this question didn't even have a name. Like it was a calendar response, but I didn't even say, hey, what's today's date? So I can see right now that I'm missing something that I would need to go back and edit. Every question will get its own column, and every response will get its own row. From here, I can do anything that I could do to a normal spreadsheet. I can chart this data, I can do functions on it, I can do anything that I would do in a spreadsheet I can do with this stuff. I can do conditional formatting to make positive or negative responses or scores pop out at me. There's any number of things I can do. Just depends on how much of a wizard I am with spreadsheet stuff. And I have all this wonderful raw data that I can now do anything I like with. So having seen my form in preview form and seen the data, I now know that I need to go back and edit. And I can make my quiz a little better. And just going through that process several times will allow me to see how the data shakes out and if it makes sense to me. So to me, that people are impatient to just kind of throw their form out there and get the data, but if you really want your form to be useful, you really need to take the time to go through that process more than once, in my experience. So there are quite a few other options in forms, and you can do a basic form in just a couple minutes with the options I've shown you already, but we can get a little bit fancy with it. Your overflow or more options menu, the little three dots that you get in forms, has some other options for you, and you can see what those are. You can make a copy of a form if you think you're going to want a very similar one. You can trash it if you don't like it. You can get a pre-filled link, which is actually very handy. When I first heard about this function, I couldn't figure out why on earth I would ever want to use that. But it actually saved me a lot of work over the summer with some classes that I was teaching. I have a evaluation form that I ask my students to fill out, and it's actually the same form for every class, but I needed to have them designate the name and the course number of each class they were taking. So instead of giving them this random string of numbers that is in our system for the course number and having them type it in possibly wrong or just be irritated that they have to type in this long string of numbers, which I'm kind of about customer service and I don't want them to do that if they don't have to, I was able to make one form for every question or every class that I was collecting data for, and then I went through with the pre-filled link function, and I could fill out the date and the course name and number for them. Then I would give them the link to that partially filled out form, and they could fill out the rest of the stuff and not have to do the irritating part. And hopefully that got me better ratings as an instructor overall. But it's a really handy thing once you kind of learn how to use it, and will save you a lot of time. So that's over there in the three dots. You can also add collaborators. So if you have someone that you're co-teaching with or that you want to have them see the data, that's one of your options here. And this is why we don't have a share button in Forms like we do with all the other Google Apps stuff. I have a send button, and we'll talk about that in a second, but if I want to share with a collaborator, this is how I do it. So I can change this, I can add someone on here, and then my co-teacher will be able to edit the form and see all the responses. So you just want to, of course, like with any Google Apps document or item that you share, you need to make sure that you're only giving them the permissions that you can trust them to have. So don't overshare, I guess, is the lesson there. And some people will add, if they're doing formative assessment and they have a running spreadsheet of little quiz that they're doing, they will add an administrator to that as collaborators so they can see the data as it comes in. Some people share it with their grade level or their PLC that they're working with, and that can be really handy as they go through this process. We're going to talk a little bit about the form itself and how you share that out to other people. And there's just a couple little tricks to know about that. There is a link up here if you guys wanted to play around. If you haven't actually used a form, you could click through there and take this little quiz that I made. You don't have to at all. You're welcome to stay right here in the webinar and just watch. But if you wanted to, you could click through to that. There are a bunch of ways to share. There is a send button within forms, and that's really good if you're sharing inside your district as opposed to publicly. You can go through to the live form, which would mean you're clicking your eyeball, your preview, and you're copying that link because you don't want to copy the link of the form you're editing. If I copy this link up here, I am giving you my editing form. And if you don't have editing rights, you're not going to be able to see it. But if I go here and I copy this one and it's public, you will, and I share that link with you in some way, you'll be able to take the form or the quiz. So I could paste this link in an email or write it on the wall or any number of ways that I could share it. These are really, really long, ugly links. So they do actually have, if you choose to send a link, a shorten URL option. That's really not a lot better in my book, honestly. Like, look at this string of numbers. Who is going to be able to type that in properly? I'm not really a fan of that. So if I'm a URL, I will use tinyurl or bit.ly or goo.gl, but that's just me. It does have that option. I can paste this in an email if I'm not sending things directly via Gmail. The email tab here will actually generate a Gmail out to whomever I am sharing with. And I could use a contact list here to share with multiple people at once. And you can see it reminds you down here if you want to add collaborators, people who can work on the form and the data, you need to do that a different way. I can also share on social media. Google Plus if I have a profile enabled, Facebook or Twitter, and it will ask me to log into those and say, allow it to have permission to share that way. So I have some options here. You can also, oops, sorry about that. Using those options in that panel, you can embed it in a website. There is an embed code button. And you could put it in a Google, in a Wix or a Weebly website if you use those external site creation or Sitefinity or SchoolWires or any number of things that teachers make websites using. If you are editing a Google site, you can insert it straight from Google Sites. You don't really have to use the embed code that's generated in the Forms tool. You just locate it in your drive and add it in there. You can share it via Google Classroom. If you're using Classroom, just like any other Google file, attach it to an assignment and have it go out to your students. You could use Google Tone to share the live form page, which if you haven't used it, it's kind of a nifty little extension for Chrome that makes a kind of almost like a little modem noise, but any Chromebook or person who's logged in that hears it, if you're logged into Chrome, their computer hears it, it will actually pop the page up on their screen. Kind of a fun little thing. Noisy, but fun. And yes, you can print it out. And no, I'm kind of kidding about the carrier pigeon, but you can print a form if it's necessary. And while we are working in the digital world here, and Google has created these intended to be digitally shared, it's also, they look okay if you print them. And as a former special ed teacher and someone who also shared a lot of information of this type with parents, I think it's important to know that you can print them and they will look decent. I do not encourage you to print them unless you have to, but you can print them and they will look okay, which is nice because it could be a lot worse. This is your little embed button. I forgot to show that to you. And if I print, it will actually show me a preview of what it's going to look like. And it's not too bad. If I had multiple pages here, you would see a little bit more detail, but it'll show me what it's going to look like. It could be worse. So not the best option to print necessarily, but it is a possibility. We kind of looked at the response data already, and if you wanted to see the responses to that little fake test quiz that I put in the last slide, you could go look at that here. And we'll see if somebody else has responded. Okay, so you can see that these were all kind of done on the same day. Don't have new responses in there yet. But if I have new ones coming in, they'll come in pretty close to live. And like I said, once you have the data in the spreadsheet, it doesn't actually create the spreadsheet until you click this green button. But once you have the data in there, you can pretty much do whatever you like with it. Oops, sorry about that. So now we are to the bells and whistles. We talked about creating a quiz, which is, again, still a pretty new feature, just like the photo responses under a multiple choice that was added in August. So there are a couple of, people are finding the occasional bug. I do want to point out that there is this wonderful thing in all of your Google tools. When you are editing, there's usually a little question mark down here, and that will allow you to send feedback about the tool when it says report a problem. They actually do read this stuff, and we've gotten a lot of features added to Classroom because people were reporting stuff in Classroom that wasn't working for them. So I highly recommend you use the little question mark. They will never respond in a warm and fuzzy way and say, oh, thanks for your feedback. We're totally working on that. We'll let you know when it's getting close. They don't do that, but suddenly that feature will appear. So they are listening, even though it's a little frustrating to not usually get feedback. Occasionally you'll get an email, but for the most part, they just kind of fix it, and there it is. So, but be aware that you can definitely give that input. There is a mobile version of Forms. There's not an app for it at this time, but you can use Chrome on your Android or iOS device and fill out a form just fine, no problemo. Not so great for creating forms, but it can be done. I have created forms on an iPad. It was not my favorite moment of life, but it is doable. I do hope that they will have a Forms app soon, because that seems to work better, at least for iOS. Branched forms, this is where we get kind of crazy, and it's kind of beyond the scope of an hour-long webinar, but I do recommend taking a class if you want to do that. What you do when you are actually adding, let's see, this option, which is go to section based on answer. What I would do is create a new section, and I would tell it for each option to go to that section. I only have one section in this form, but I could basically take a student on a different path through a quiz or a form based on the responses they're giving. And it allows you to create a kind of an adaptive test or quiz. And the responses are pretty, or the possibilities for the types of responses you can get are pretty intense. We use a branched form when we do Google Summits, and we have 30 or 35 sessions. We use one form and we say, where did you go the first hour? And based on their response, we go to that presenter's page and get the feedback on that presenter. So that's just a basic idea of what you can do with that. You can get really, really complicated with it. The first few times you do it, you will probably beat your head against the wall a little bit, because it's a process of trying to wrap your head around exactly where you're sending people, and you have to do the same thing and go through over and over to make sure everything's going the right place. But it's a really great tool, and so once you're comfortable with the basics of forms, definitely try that, and it might open up some great possibilities. If you haven't played with Google My Maps at all, you can export form data to maps and have people tell you their favorite vacation spot, have it auto-populate on a Google map, stuff like that. Amazing possibilities in the classroom, super fun. There are some add-ons in the little add-on store that I showed you that can allow you to do mail merge, where the data that goes into your spreadsheet can then be put back out into a letter or an email to send information to people, or into a PDF. You can do scripting and pretty much program it to do anything you want if you're clever at that sort of thing via Sheets. Once the data goes into Sheets, you can manipulate it. Pre-filled links we kind of talked about, and collaborators. So there's a lot of really fun things you can do, and you guys will get these links when Stephanie sends out, I think, the response after this. And there are some links here that will give you a few more ideas of how to use and how the add-on Flubaroo that gives you more self-grading quiz options would work for you. So I am going to stop talking and see if anyone has any questions.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yeah, this was really good, and I was thinking as you were going through that, for people who will be watching the recording, we get a lot of people doing that. There could definitely be people that are new to forms, so I'm really glad that you did, excuse me, review some of the basics. And I wanted to point out at the end of this, one of the cool plugins that we're using here is called Autocrat, and I will at the end show an opportunity to go and fill out a form and get a certificate of completion for this webinar. So you'll get to see one of the kind of add-ons and use Google Forms in action. So I wanted to point that out, and I'm keeping an eye out for questions coming in right now. I had a question. Is there a way to do any kind of spell checking when you're creating a form? Does it have that like Docs would?
That is a good question. I think, oops, hang on, I'm going to cough. Excuse me.
Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to mute myself so I didn't cough in yet. I think Grammarly will do that,
Mm-hmm.
which is a plugin for Chrome. Excuse me, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't have it enabled because it annoys me because I'm already a good speller. So you could try Grammarly, which is a plugin that you get from the Chrome Web Store.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just thought, since there's a lot of review on the forum before you want to send it out, I thought, oh, that would be a good thing to catch any errors in that
Yeah,
aspect.
definitely a
Um,
good idea.
so we did have someone ask about what add-ons you use, Catherine.
In Forms, I have, so when you're using Forms, you're going to use the add-ons in Sheets as well to manipulate your data. And Autocrat, as Stephanie mentioned, is a really handy one. Flubaroo is one that's in Sheets, so I would find those in my sheet. As you can see, I have a bazillion of these because I do a lot of different stuff in Sheets and I train on it. But Flubaroo is the one I would use in Sheets to do the quizzes. I have used Power Tools to affect my data that I've gotten from a sheet. There's also one called Super Quiz that does a similar thing to Flubaroo. And there's good old Autocrat, which does a million things and is really handy. And I believe Autocrat and Flubaroo are made by the same guy. His name is Andrew Stillman, and he is like your best friend. If you do Google Apps, he makes the most amazing scripts for everything. In Forms, the add-ons that I use are Choice Eliminator and let's see. Yeah, Choice Eliminator is one of my most frequently used one. What this will do is, say you're have a forum where people can sign up for conference slots, and I have spots that says Tuesday at 9 to 9:30, Tuesday at 9:30 to 10, Tuesday at 10 to 11 or whatever. And I can designate that I only want one person signed up per spot, and then Choice Eliminator will, once someone has selected the 9 to 9:30 time slot, will eliminate it from the multiple choice spots for that question. It won't even show up as an option for people to
Okay.
choose. So that's a really handy one. Form notifications gives you a little more powerful ability to send emails to yourself or to the people taking the quiz. Form limiter will allow you to automatically turn your form off at a certain time or after it's collected a certain number of responses. So those are my favorite ones. And a lot of math teachers are using GMath for forms, which allows them to use LaTeX. If you're a math teacher, you might be familiar with that, to create equations and kind of some symbols for math that you normally would not be able to just type into a form.
Oh, that's cool. I had another question come in about can you set up sections for several people to approve the form? For example, principal and assistant principal.
Um, by section, not that I know of, but what you would do is add them as collaborators, just being aware that you don't have the choice to make them just a viewer of the data from forms, but what you could do um, is go into the actual sheet and share it this way and just give them view or comment only access. And
Mm-hmm.
that would give them the ability to review the data. As far as reviewing the form itself, I would think you would just send it to them and have them send you feedback because as the sections really just paginate the quiz, excuse me, and allow you to decide which section is connected to which question. So I don't
Okay.
think they would help you with that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And then we have a question. I might need to get clarification from this teacher. Any way to upload a test? Oh, maybe she means um, a test
Something
that's
that's
been
in a
created somewhere
different format.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not really an import feature. I guess it would depend on how you have created, excuse me, your quizzes or tests. There is, and I try to remember the name of it. There's an add-on that'll, I don't know if I have it in here. I have to try and figure out what it is. There was an add-on for Sheets that permitted you to create a quiz in Sheets and then shove it out into forms from there. So if you had a test that was already created that you had in a spreadsheet form, for example, Excel, and you had uploaded the Excel sheet into your drive, opened it in Google Sheets, and then used that add-on to create a form. So that's kind of a roundabout way to import a form. Other than that, I don't know of a way. I will tell you that if you have a lot of multiple choice options, you can do just a list that, like, if you typed in a document, great, return, meh, return, yuck, return, and so on, and you just paste that whole list in here, it will split it out and know that it's multiple options. It's pretty
Ah,
smart about copying and pasting in forms, so it's pretty easy to recreate most of the time.
great, great. Yeah, and it's kind of like Docs where you can make a copy, right? So you're kind of if you want one form to be a
Absolutely.
template for other
Yep.
forms.
I
Okay,
can just make a copy of the whole form.
that's great. Well, I think, yeah, we're just about out of time, and I haven't seen any other questions come in. This is really, yeah, I think a really popular topic these days because it just really makes things a lot more efficient. Oh, we did get one more question. Any way to add sound in the questions? And the example would be in a spelling test. Hmm.
I spent like my entire first year of using Google Forms, which is a ways back when it wasn't quite as fancy as it is now. I was like, oh, I would love to give my spelling test via Google Forms because there's nothing I hate more than correcting spelling tests. That's just me as a teacher. Um, there, there are some ways you could do this. What it will allow you to do is to insert a video, um, and it does only accept YouTube, unfortunately, at this time. So if you have your YouTube channel as a teacher and you want to make a video of you reading the spelling words or whatever, or if there's a sound that you wanted them to hear, you could do that by adding a video and then have a question after the video that related to the content of the video. So that's about as close as you can get to having a sound in there. No way to do a sound as a multiple choice question option in my experience.
Okay, good to know. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up so that I can show people these links to our exciting form that we have. I also have included my email and Catherine's email here. I had a few people asking if this presentation is being recorded. Yes, it is, and I will be posting it at ctl.info/webinars. And over here in this blue box, you'll see the link for our webinar. And yeah, it's a bit of a long link. So you'll be getting an email in about an hour with the same link. You don't have to write it down if you don't want to. And it's a brief survey, and then you will get a PDF certificate of completion for today's webinar. So Catherine, I really want to thank you so much for such an informative presentation, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy day to attend, and we hope to see you in future webinars. Thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great day.